Here we go. We're live with another amazing, this time, I cannot say a forsaking my father's religion story. We don't have an ex Muslim to share his testimony, but we have a very relevant topic to the day, to the time that we're living in. Brother Raymond, thank you so very much for accepting my invitation. I want to tell my audience I have learned a whole lot more about Islam after I converted to Christianity. I was born to this religion. I was um, I was taught the Sharia. I went to the mosque. The Shias told me this and that. I learned a whole lot from them. But then at 21, almost 22 years old, I converted to Christianity, and then I started studying Islam. And in a closed country such as Iran, it was very hard to get access to books, internet, and things of that nature. And then I came across your books, your articles, especially your website. I have been learning a whole lot. Um, you have done several podcasts with very famous YouTubers, influencers, and all that. And I have wrote several articles. Every time I watch one of your podcasts, I write several articles. For example, about the myth of modest Islam, or reformation of Islam, or um, everything pretty much you talk about. I've written articles on it, and I just want to say thank you so very much for giving your knowledge, giving your background, giving your whatever you are studying, giving it out and putting it out to the world. You're benefiting us, and I'm so grateful for that. Today we're here to talk about your latest book, the two swords of Christ, which I'm so excited to hear. I'll ask you, and I commented on a lot of things, because the version of Christianity in Iran is very different than the version of Christianity that is in the West. Out there, we know who is our enemy, and we don't compromise with them. We don't invite them to our home churches, to the underground movement. But here is different, brother, and you have wrote a lot about it. So please introduce yourself to the audience. Tell us your latest book, and I cannot wait to hear.
Well, thank you very much, Muhammad, and thank you for that excellent introduction. And frankly, I'm honored to hear what you said. I'm always, very, very happy to hear when people tell me that my work has been beneficial to them. That's the whole point in the end. So thank you for that. And yeah, my introduction to your audience. Raymond Ibrahim. I was born here in the United States. My family's Coptic Christians from Egypt, which is the native inhabitants of Egypt, the pre-Islamic Egyptian Christians who converted in the first century. So long, long history with Islam. We know what it means to live under Islam and with Islam, and et cetera, et cetera. And I was born and raised here, but I kind of like understood everything back then due to my family, and I grew up bilingual, speaking Arabic of a sort anyway, the Egyptian dialect, and later on I enlarged it to speak the more formal standard Arabic. And yeah, so based on my background like yours, because we are from the region, obviously our interest is innate. It's just part of who we are. But also growing here, I decided to actually study it formally. I was a history major, and before long, my historical studies were basically centered around Islam and Christianity, because being a Christian whose people are surrounded by Muslims, I naturally had an interest in that nexus, between Islam and Christendom. So really, going all the way back to my college days, my master's thesis was about that. It was about the first battle between Christians and Muslims. And since then, I've been very, very much interested still in all that sort of thing. And, so really this has been my daytime job, the Islam issue. And I write a lot, especially about the persecution of Christians. And mostly lately, I've been writing a lot about history. So I'm going back to my initial professional academic interest, history, and which leads us, of course, to the book we're going to be talking about, which is The Two Swords of Christ. I finally got my author's copies. Here it is. And it's a pretty long one. I went overboard. And this one, the subtitle is Five Centuries of War Between Islam and the Warrior Monks of Christendom. And yeah, what you just said about the kind of Christianity that is in the East. Actually, the kind of Christianities that proliferate anywhere are very different from the West. And I think and one of the reasons is why I wanted to write this book. I mean, as usual, these ideas come to me. It's just innate interest. I like history, but the lesson, of course, is to show modern day Western Christians that you don't have to be a doormat. In fact, you're not supposed to be a doormat. One of the themes that I sort of elaborate a little bit in the book that I think is very important is when you talk about Jesus's words. I mean, it's all encapsulated in one verse where he really says, there's actually a lot of verses, but one that just comes to my mind right now, which I rarely talk about, is basically, be as harmless as doves and wise as serpents. And it just seems to me like Western Christians are really good at the first part, being harmless as doves, but they are not at all wise as serpents. What does that latter part mean, being wise as a serpent? It means don't be naive, don't be gullible, don't be an idiot. Don't just be kind of like, my job as a Christian is to always just, give you the benefit of the doubt and have you walk all over me and I say, oh well, that's my job. I'm a doormat. And again, and the other theme, in fact, the title of the book, The Two Swords of Christ, this is in fact a reference to another saying of Jesus, where basically it's in Luke, and he tells his disciples, sell your cloak and buy a sword. And they say, look, Lord, here are two swords. And he says, that is enough. Now, here's a perfect example of how modern day Christians, what does that mean to them? It means nothing. They'll tell you it's just symbolic, it's allegory. It's just, it's just Jesus. It's just Jesus saying nothing really, but he's saying something. I mean, he ordered them to go buy a sword, and they looked around and they said, well, here's two. And he said, it's enough. So one of the modern day interpretations is that when he says it's enough, he's basically saying, like, shut up, that's enough out of you. Don't you understand? I'm not talking about two swords. I'm talking metaphorically. In which case, well, why is he telling them to sell their, I mean, it gets confusing if that's what he's saying. So to pre-modern Christians, it actually had a different meaning. What he was saying, according to them, and it comes out a lot in the book, which is why I titled the book, The Two Swords, as you can see on the title, The Two Swords of Christ. The reason that he said that, according to the early theologians, was that there's two kinds of warfare that we as Christians must confront. And one is the kind that we're familiar with, spiritual warfare. Okay, so you need the spiritual sword. But then there's the material, secular warfare, and you need the material, secular sword. So, corporeal, incorporeal, spiritual, secular, material, non-material. And the thing is, like, if you don't go with that it's easy to reject that interpretation today and say, no, that's violence, we can't do that. But the fact is, and I quote a lot of people in the book, and we're talking about the Crusader era, if Christians did not believe that, Christianity would have died, honestly. And I don't know if that's what Jesus wanted, because if Christians did not defend themselves, if they turned the other cheek and said, we're going to be doormats, we'll never take up arms, we'll never defend, we'll never stand up for the right cause, we'll never engage in just war, it would have ended. Because, and not even, I mean, Islam, of course, was the main surrounding force that was engulfing and swallowing up most of Christendom historically, but all the other forces too, pagan forces, So the idea that modern day Christians today have, which is that I can never, ever, ever engage in any kind of violence, is just, it's not really Christian. It was not understood.
Many Christians did not get that. And the pivotal point is just war. Okay, so yes, you're not supposed to go and attack people to plunder them and kill them and enslave them and take their possessions. Okay, the way Islam does. Okay?
Yeah, i.e. jihad.
Yeah, exactly. Jihad. You're not supposed to do that. But if they're coming to you and they're doing that to innocent women and children, you're supposed to fight them back. And then this goes all the way back to St. Augustine, which is ironic because Western Christians, including Protestants, love to claim St. Augustine, who of course is Catholic, because a lot of what he says resonates with the modern era. But he's actually also the chief articulator of just war. So he was on board with warfare. He would have been on board with warfare in the Crusades. Okay, So that's in some a general idea of the sort
I
of.
think there is a. I'm going to just put a comment in here. I think there is a point if you're sharing the gospel and you're personally getting attacked for the sake of the gospel, you say, I'm turning the cheek. But if somebody is attacking my wife for no reason, or my children that they cannot defend themselves, and I am the father that's been assigned to this family to defend them, and I say I'm turning the other cheek, I believe there is no love in that. Love defends. That's a part
Absolutely,
of the gospel. Your
absolutely,
love defends the people that are vulnerable, your wife, your family, your children. But if say I'm out there, I'm sharing the gospel with a Muslim, which we do in our ministry. We are out there, we're sharing the gospel, and then I get attacked as a reason of sharing the gospel. I might defend or run away, but it doesn't mean I'm going to beat them up.
right.
What is that? I think that's the confusing part in the Western world, that turning the other cheek means as a nation also that we
Yeah,
need to turn
yeah,
the
yeah,
other cheek,
yeah.
which is absolutely, if you know any Bible, Romans 13 or any of the government has been given to
Yes,
defend, to
right,
protect.
right.
I mean, how are you going to deal with Romans 13, 1 through 4? How are you going to deal with that? That it's their assignment by God, and they have a sword. They carry the sword not in vain. How are you
Yeah.
going to? But I think it gets mixed with other things, and then this being a doormat or being nice or something like it becomes a virtue in the church or in the body of Christ. That means defending yourself or others. It's not been commanded by Jesus.
No, you're absolutely right. And your point about it's become virtuous, it's also, I call it, here's the thing, to be what we're talking about, defending the innocents and the poor and the weak against unprovoked violence. It's easy to not do that. You see what I'm saying? So it's easy for me to say, no, I'm not going to fight back. I'm not going to defend them. And then I'm going to pat myself and say I'm a good Christian. Okay. So a lot of, I think this idea of being a doormat is sort of it's so popular because of cowardice.
Yeah.
It's a lot of people don't want to take. It's hard to confront. It's hard to be confrontational and objectable and fighting back. No, but that's not easy. So a lot of these people, I think, who don't do it, they claim they're not doing it because they're pious, when in fact they're just cowards. Okay. But your other points, of course, we need to completely elaborate on them. They're all right. And the idea, of course, so the just war theory, think about it. What do this isn't me, what do the theologians, like, including St. Augustine, what does he cite? He talks about how, for example, the Roman centurion goes to Jesus to heal his servant. And Jesus heals him, and then and he has nothing but praise for the Roman centurion. I haven't found a man of such faith, etc. Right?
Mhm.
Now, generally, when Jesus performs when he performs a miracle on someone, it ends up, it culminates with him telling that person, repent, right? Repent of your
Exactly.
evil ways. He
Mhm.
didn't say that to this centurion. He didn't say, hey, now it's time to quit violence, because as a centurion, this man was in charge and responsible for violence, including killing of people. Jesus didn't say that. He didn't say, now you have faith, but there's one thing missing you. Go repent and leave the military. Same
He
thing
said,
with John
sell
the
your
Baptist.
sword. He didn't tell him to sell your sword.
No, exactly.
Mhm.
No, but he did tell people, sell your garments and buy a sword. So this idea is that, this passive idea, which would have been so alien to pre-modern Christians, has become so embedded, and I think in Western society, and I think it's intentional, and it's from people and elements that hate Christianity. Okay, they are behind this. They support this. They diffuse this message. They convince Christians your job is it's just an abstract idea. John 3:16. God loved the world, sent Jesus. I believe in it. That's it. I don't have to do anything, and I better not engage in any confrontational violence or any objectionable demeanor, activity, etc. Because that's not Christian. And well, guess what? That kind of belief, that kind of behavior, is precisely what the enemies of Christianity want, because it means you've
If
given
I
up.
was a Muslim jihadi,
Yeah,
and if I know I'm going to attack you, I would take your swords away. I would completely strip you of your swords, your defense, and then ideologically, if you would speak about it, or in the army term, doesn't matter, physically, spiritually, however I can disarm you, that I could be coming in and plunder you. If I was a Muslim jihadi and I wanted to attack the West, that's what I would be preaching. You're a doormat. You're supposed to turn your cheek. You're not supposed to defend. If you're defending yourself, this is not virtuous, it's evil. Jesus is always about love and coexist and bringing everybody in the house.
In fact,
It's the ideology that the enemy absolutely loves.
well, what you said isn't even hypothetical. In my book, Two Swords, and in my other books, I describe instances where Muslims and Christians debate, and that's what the Muslims say. They try to demoralize the Christians by saying, well, you're not being good Christians because you're fighting back, while they do jihad and say it's good to do jihad. So exactly, people need to understand the reason you have been disarmed, and there's this prevailing message that you can never, you can never be militant. Both, I don't even mean physically or literally. I mean figuratively and spiritually militant. It's coming from sources that hate Christianity. This is their way of pulling the rug underneath you and and defanging you and making you absolutely neutral and passive to their own agenda. And that's why that idea is so popular. And in the book, it comes again, because the book is about these knights and Christian fighters and how, and they actually suffered this, in the very beginning. There were Christians who were saying, oh, you can't fight back. I mean, that idea has been around. Okay. But they would respond in the way that I'm telling you. And also, for example, they would argue, okay, so violence is bad, right? So now here's a hypothetical situation. There's a woman and a child, and she's being attacked, let's say, by a jihadist who's going to rape and kill them. Okay. And all you can do is either nothing or fight back and maybe even kill him. All right. Now, if you do nothing, well, guess what? You've just consigned the innocent woman and child to rape and death. Yeah. So how is that a good deed? Someone's going to die. Shouldn't it at least be the person who's initiating it and you're defending to protect the innocent? So you see what I'm saying? I mean, if this was presented to Jesus, does someone actually
instinctively, logically, religiously, in every sense you look at it, it makes sense that God has assigned me, as especially if you're a male or you're a father figure or you're a pastor, to defend whoever God has assigned to me. Like, it is so logical. It's so
so innate. It's instinctive.
Such a we're wired like that. You just. Yeah. And when you take that away, it is going to take a lot of mental gymnastics and games and so many psychological warfare to get you to the point that you think, nah, you can take my wife, God forbid, you take my children or attack anybody that God has assigned me, attack my church, whatever it is, and just plunder it because I've been assigned here to be a doormat and you can walk all over me and I'm going to turn the other cheek.
And that's exactly where we're at. You're right.
Sure.
Yeah. And that's where we're at. You're right. Because there's been a lot of social engineering, especially in the West, to redefine Christianity along those terms that you just described, to convince children and boys, especially when they're born, okay, that, you want to be a good Christian. See, it starts off, I want to be a good Christian. I want to read the Bible. I want to follow it. But then, all the message from the ones who supposedly understand Christianity is you're a doormat and you better not do anything. You better not, don't even try to be good because that means you're trying to get to heaven by works. Yeah. And it's like, I'm sorry, but, Jesus, he spoke mostly about action. It wasn't, and I mean, we can talk about the book of James, all right, but most people don't like that. So there's obviously impetus for action. And the stuff that's innate and normal, like protecting your innocent children and women, I just can't imagine any Christian, including Jesus, of course. Jesus is the one who actually made a weapon out of cords, created a whip, and whipped people, not just the animals, the people, to drive them out because he was indignant at the sin they were committing in the temple. Okay, and in fact, in the book, it talks about the Templars actually believed they were in the temple, which is today Al-Aqsa Mosque, and they describe it. One of their ideas was they were actually inspired by that scene, which is if Jesus was whipping out these merchants, how much more must we act to whip out the Muslims who are actually destroying and attacking Jerusalem and the holy city and the Holy Sepulchre and all the churches and so forth. And so to them, they actually described Christ as the first knight.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
So the first batch that you're talking about in your book is the knights that they were in the temple in Jerusalem, defending themselves and defending the temple from the invasion of the jihadi Muslims.
Right. So the temple was their residence. And what had happened is, this is now the first crusade. Let's go back real quick and summarize it. It's 1095, and that's when the first crusade is called, and the European Christians go to the Holy Land, which is under Islamic occupation. It was conquered, of course, centuries earlier in the 7th century. But then it was Christian. It was part of the Christian Eastern Roman Empire, Jerusalem, and all the Holy Land. It was conquered and Islamicized in the 7th century. And then depending on the leader in which era, sometimes it was not a lot of persecution and pilgrims from Europe could come, and other times it was bad. Right before the First Crusade in 1095, it was horrible. So you had all the Christians in the local regions being attacked and massacred. European pilgrims were being attacked and raped, and there's really horrific stories. And so that gave rise to the First Crusade, which was where we, European Franks, the Christians, are going to go recover the Holy Land and make sure that these abuses are no longer. So people can visit the Holy Land, you're Christians, without being molested and murdered, because that's what was happening. Yeah. Okay? And they were successful. By 1099, they had reconquered Jerusalem. But then, it's a little Christian kingdom within an Islamic sea. It's in the Middle East. So the pilgrims who would come from Europe were still being attacked and killed before they even got to Jerusalem. So a small group of knights who were very pious, decided they became monks. And at the same time, their whole life was to protect the pilgrims from these Islamic attacks. And they are the knights. They're called the Knights of the Temple, or the Templars, because one of the Crusader kings gave them the temple as their residence. That was their base, their home, their headquarters. But their function was what we're talking about, which was basically their whole function was to protect Christians who are being still attacked by Muslims, so they can just simply come as pilgrims, worship, and go back home. Okay.
So from the 7th century to almost 11 centuries, we have pretty much all of the Middle East, as far as Iran, Afghanistan of today. You go to Pakistan, India, and then you come all the way to all of North Africa, all of Middle East. We're into parts of Spain now. It's all conquered, and then these Christians are trying to go to the Holy Land, just doing their pilgrimage, see the resurrection tomb, or the tomb of Christ, and the resurrection sites, and the Gethsemane garden, and all that. They can't. On the way, they're getting plundered, they're getting raped, molested, killed, many massacred. So imagine church sends these people over to Jerusalem today, and then 50 of them, 100 of them are all killed or raped or whatever. And then, so it wasn't like that the Muslims were residing there with harmony and peace with other Christians and Jews. And then there's some people were mistreating and abusing this doctrine. No, they took over all of these countries. This nation have been Islamicized, such as your country, such as my country. The only difference, I think, between Iran and Egypt is now Egyptians speak Arabic. The Iranians fought that, and they didn't, because of the Rumi and other poet, as I recall. But we were all conquered. Now we're Islamicized, and then the only religion is Islam. And then if you had all of this European pilgrimage going to visiting any of these countries, or going through the Silk Road or any of that, they're getting plundered. And then finally, the church decides that this is our Holy Land. This is the birthplace of Christ. We need to free it. So they decide to take an army there.
Exactly. Absolutely. That's a good summary of it. And now compare and contrast what you just said, which is the accurate summary, with what we're told. And what we're told, of course, is the exact opposite. I mean, first of all, people want you to think that somehow Islam has always been in the Middle East. It's somehow organic to Iran and Egypt, for example.
Absolutely not. Yes.
Yeah, I mean, most people don't realize, that, for example, Christianity was more embedded and more, more permeated a country like Egypt than it did Europe at the time, or that Zoroastrianism and the high culture of Iran was embedded. And you're absolutely right. I always say, to the credit of the Iranian people, they didn't assimilate to the point that they lost their actual language, whereas the Coptic language is the ancient Egyptian language. Yeah. So the liturgy, it still exists in the church, but people don't really speak it. I've studied it a little, but it's really the ancient Egyptian language using the Greek alphabet, essentially. And that's gone. And that's most people. And that's why they lose their identities and so forth, and they get absorbed. But the idea, of course, is that these places weren't even Christian in the first place, and everything was fine. And then, for some reason, these crazy, evil Europeans decided to go there and ruin it all and colonize because
imperialistic. That's their favorite word. This were unprovoked imperialists that they just wanted to expand their kingdom, not because they wanted to free their people, not free the lands that once were Christian lands or the Holy Lands belonged to this people. Not any of that. It was just unprovoked, evil imperialist white man that just decided to take the sword and kill everybody on their way, including children and this and that. And that's the story of the Crusade you hear. But when you realize that 4 centuries of absolute harassment, imperialist expansion of Islam pushed the church to the point that they did not have any other choice. They tried. Negotiation didn't work. I don't know. Bribe them didn't work. None of it worked, to the point that they said, we need to fight this evil. We need to subdue it, or otherwise we will not have Christianity. Probably people in England, in France, in Germany, they would have been speaking Arabic if they were the doormats of today.
Edward Gibbon, the Renaissance time historian, well, not Renaissance, Enlightenment historian from England, who wrote The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, a very popular book, he said exactly that. And he wasn't he wasn't a fan of the Crusades. He was an Enlightenment historian, writing in the 18th century. And he actually basically says that if it wasn't for, he speaks of one of the battles where the Christians stopped the Muslims in Europe, the Battle of Tours in 732. And he says if it wasn't for that, in Oxford right now, we would be hearing the Muazzin and we'd all be speaking Arabic.
Wow. Which now they are.
Yeah. But the problem, and this is why I'm so focused on history and I always lament what I call fake history, is it's such a powerful vehicle for what they're trying to do, which is brainwash people. Like you said, if you talk, I was perusing through a little book that was sent to me about, it's about the golden age of Islam, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm just looking in the intro, and it summarizes the Crusades in like 2 pages. And oh my God, okay, the Muslims did nothing wrong. This was just about some Byzantine emperor who was angry because he's losing lands. And then the Europeans jumped on it because they want to gain lands and they want to betray him. And then the only stories that are shared of Europeans are like they're cannibals. They were eating Muslims, and they were just and this is a PhD. It's a well-known book. I don't even know the title. It's somewhere here, but anyway, it's an approved book. That's what you should read. And to someone like me who knows the actual reality, it's so horrible, because I know that if I wanted to give a summary in 2 pages, okay, I mean, I'll tell you what was happening. I'll tell you about the persecution that prompted it. That's why it really happened. Okay, but none of that is there. And if you read it, it's basically the Europeans, the Christians are horrible, and the Muslims are innocent, wonderful victims. And we have a lot to learn from what Islam did, and that is the mainstream narrative. So when I went to college and I studied courses specifically about these topics, these were the books that were given to me. And then I made the crazy move of actually reading primary sources, and it was the exact opposite story. Primary sources are the people who live there, Muslims and Christians. And the Muslims are even more graphic and more insistent that this is holy war, this is jihad, they're contemptible infidels, et cetera, et cetera. So the whole point is there's been subversive attack on history, so that Christians, do not understand that actually you guys have been victims for the longest time, and you've been fighting for the longest time. And now that you're finally, the West is been raised up, they want you to think that that's where you've always been and you've been mistreating people. I'll give you a quick summary and I'll stop. But there's a book I had to review. It's called The Crusade and Jihad, and it's by one of these people. It's an academic, well-known academic, Robert Polk, I think is his name. I think he passed away, and I had to review it. 1,000 page. It's like almost 1,000 page, the book, and the title is Crusade and Jihad, and it claims to be a history of the conflict, kind of like what I do. Okay, in this 1,000 pages, something like the first 50 pages talk about the Islamic conquests and attacks on Europe that went on from 7th century to 18th century. 50 pages. And it's very hygienic and clean. And you don't even hear anything about atrocities or anyone killed. It's just war.
So
then the last
7th century to 18th century, 11 centuries, 1100 years of attack. It's out of 1,000 gets 50 pages.
Yeah. And then the rest is the colonial era. Now look at these horrible Europeans, how they took over. So if you don't know any better, right, and you read that, of course you're going to conclude, these horrible Europeans, horrible Christians.
It is truly a betrayal to the Western culture, to the Western Christianity. It is a betrayal. It is somebody that
intentional. It's strategic. It's not just. It is definitely a betrayal. You're absolutely right, but it has a purpose. It's driven. It's driven by forces that hate Christianity. And, instead, if we can't kill Christians, we'll make them kill themselves by turning themselves into little weak doormats and everyone walks over them and kills them. Look what's happening in Europe with this whole migrant crisis. What other country, or like the UK, who does that? What non-Western country says, everyone come in and I'm going to stop my religion and my culture and my customs to appease you, and then the government helps the invader? It's really, really warped, but the problem is people have become so desensitized because it's been going on for so long.
Yes. Empowering your enemies, not even being neutral. You're just actually empowering the very invaders. And then
it's so obvious. Yeah.
What was that?
It's so obvious.
It is. It's backward, truly backward. Yeah. You would thinking, okay, regardless of the political view of whatever nation that is, the people have elected you to defend your own people. And now you have abandoned that task, the basic task of defending your own people. You have now you're inviting and empowering your invaders. Plus, if somebody talks about what is happening, then from your own people, you criticize or even persecute your own. It is mind-boggling. Like, if Islam could have ever written a better book or any invasion theory, this would be it.
Yeah. But what you described, we come back to the point, which is the only reason they get away. First of all, this phenomena that we just described and you just kind of underscored, it's only in the West. There's no non-Western nation where that acts that way. There's no I don't care if it's Islamic, Buddhist, Japan, Hindu, Latin American. Nobody in those countries says, you are outsider, come in and dictate to me how I should live, and I'm going to change everything to make it comfortable for you. That never happens. The reason it's being the reason the West can be exploited goes back to this doormat Christianity idea. Okay, it's on the one hand, whichever Christians remain in the West have bought into this. It's my job to just let people come in and do whatever they want. And even the non-Christians, we have to admit, people don't realize this. Even if you're a secularist or an atheist, your culture, if you're a Westerner, is still infused with Christian ideas. Okay, so being a nice guy and turning the other cheek, making room for the outsider, that's still part of Western culture, even if you're an atheist. So the reason that they can do that and exploit and take advantage of Western people and turn them into these doormats is this assault and undermining of Christian theology.
I mean, when you're talking, there is like at least 50 different questions from every point that pops up in my mind that could get us off what we're trying to talk in regard to, for example, this very idea of, let's say, I'm an atheist, I'm a secular person in the Western world or in Christianity, and then you just deny that there's anything Christian about the founders of the West or anything. Everything is pretty much, it is discredited as being Christian or biblical. But everything that it is about freedom, human rights, respecting of others' life,
Yeah.
actually nature, that you don't see it any other place. For example, in Iran, practically all animals have been extinct. They have been hunted, poached, because if there is a respect, it comes from the Bible, that you respect what God has been given to you as a steward. You're not the owner. God, this belongs to God of the Bible, and you're as a steward, a manager, to manage it well. And then you say, no, that's no. The founders were a bunch of deists, and they never believed in anything biblical, or this is just an afterthought, and you need to get away from it. And the more you get away from it, then you're going to be invaded by very strong theology such as Islam, that they don't play this type of games of I'm here to coexist. And if you say, well, Christ is the only way to salvation, that's bigotry now. But to them, if they say Allah is the only way, oh, we love Islam. It's like, how did we, brother, how many centuries has been this brainwashing going, this programming has been going, that we are here in the West, that we think this is virtuous, that we're abandoning our history, our religion, and for the sake of being accepted by others or being nice to others, where all of this starts.
Well, okay, so great points. So think about it. First of all, it's all those atheists who insist, Western atheists who insist, there's no real Christian background to the West, etc. Here's one simple question. Okay, so why did all of the principles that secular Western humanists prize, all those principles, why did they just happen to happen in Christian nations and not in Islam, not in Buddhist, not in Shinto lands, not in Hindu lands? We always hear how advanced Islam was in the Golden Age. Why didn't all of these humanitarian principles rise there? Because the bottom line is they do come from the Bible. They do come from Christianity. And whether you're a Christian or not, whether you call yourself an atheist, if you are a product of Western civilization, you've imbibed these humanitarian impulses. The idea of dignifying the woman, or even monotheism. That's Christian. That's Christian. If you believe that and you're an atheist, well, guess what? It comes from Christianity. That's why you believe that. The idea of, it's funny because they always attack Western, European, white people as apparently the only people who ever enslaved anyone, right? And yet, yeah, of course, whites and Europeans did enslave people, but so did everyone else, and everyone enslaved whites too. But the one thing that the whites did that the non-whites did not do is they actually abolished slavery around the world. And primarily England in the 19th century is the one that made sure slavery was basically extinct. It's, of course, back now in the world, and a lot of it is in the Islamic world, and especially in Africa and Asia as well. So my point is, you can try to hide, and you can try to dissemble, and you can try to turn Christianity into something it's not, and say the founders of the U.S. and whatnot were deists, and they weren't real Christians, et cetera, et cetera. But the entire civilization of the West is completely founded on Christianity, more than it is on anything else, more than it is on Greco-Roman philosophy, okay, more than it is on, the Enlightenment and the Renaissance. It's so embedded in its fabric, even though a lot of people are trying to suppress and deny and excise it out. It's still the main thing that colors people's worldview, including, if not especially, the people who hate it so much. These Western leftist types who don't even understand where all their principles come from.
And it's very appealing to other nations, other people group, people that they want to seek refuge even, such as people like me. Why didn't I flee to China?
Yeah.
And I was trying to get to the West as a persecuted Christian, former Muslim, apostasy punishable by death in Iran. Why didn't I go to, I don't know, let's say Vietnam or any other nation that is out there that is non-Christian? Because you don't have freedom, because where there's no Bible, there's no freedom. The basis of the freedom is the Bible, that love your neighbor and be good do unto others as you want to be done to you. Anyway, I think you and I we have carried on this conversation, and it goes about 52 other different directions. But I really want to get to the two swords of Christ, the two swords of Christ. So we talked about the first batch of knights that they went to defend the temple. And pretty much what Jesus did that made a whip and God cleaned up the temple. This is my Father's house. Why are you making a mockery out of it? And now the knights reading those passages, those Christians, they're like, now we have been plundered. We need to clean up the temple. So they go and free up the land. So what is the second batch that you're talking about in your book?
So as I mentioned, the book, the title, The Two Swords of Christ, is sort of a play on the verse where Jesus talks about two swords, but it's also about two groups. One is the first one, which you just mentioned, the Knights of the Temple or the Templars. And the second one are the Hospitallers or the Knights of St. John of the Hospital. And they, when you really look at what their whole genesis is, are even more telling. So these guys start off as, they're actually older than the Templars. They're a Christian order, and they're just dedicated to, it's a hospice. So, a hospice back in the day, before hospitals, they built a hospice in Jerusalem, and they were also attacked by the Muslims there, back and forth. And they had to pay a lot of money to the Sultan to exist. But the whole point of the hospice was for whenever a Christian pilgrim does come, we can help them. We can give them a place to live, to sleep. We can feed them. We can try to take care of their health, medical needs, whatever. So that's their origin. And the verses that actuated them are, of course, the ones that are, which you mentioned, which is to help your fellow man. Their prayer included something, to our lords, the sick. Okay, so they are servants of the sick. Now, the word hospital today comes from these guys, the Hospitallers. They are the origin, okay? And at this point, they're not militants. So they're just, monks who are serving the sick and needy and the travelers and the pilgrims. But before long, after the Templars, they start realizing, okay, so, why are we helping these people? Because by the time they come to us, they've already been attacked and mauled by the Muslims. So why don't we actually nip it in the bud and try to protect them, just like the Templars? Okay, so they became militarized in the same fashion. But it's very ironic that who could think that? Think about a nurse, like let's say a male nurse. That is the most militant guy at the same time. But you see the purpose and the function. It's not because he's just a violent man. No, he wants to help the sick and needy. The lords are sick and poor. And the only way you can do it, instead of sitting back and saying, all right, I'm going to wait until you get attacked and mauled and raped, and then when you come, I'm going to wipe your wounds. The way they decided to do it is, we're going to go on the offensive and make sure we protect you, battle by battle, sword by sword, fire by fire. If they come at us, we are going to fight them in the same exact kind. And, I get into all the theology and the biblical verses, the just war and whatnot that justified both of them. But I just find it, they're so amazing, especially to a modern day Christian, because on the one hand, they're very pious. These are monks. So when they're not at war, they're actually like on their hands and knees praying and fasting. And okay, that's what they're doing. But then as a part of they justified it, the war against Muslims, they justified it as an aspect of love for fellow Christians. Because why would I just let them go get mauled and killed? I have to stand up. And if someone's going to get hurt, let it be the aggressor. Because until they learn to stop being aggressors and fighting. So it's I think it's very unique and very shocking to modern day Western Christians to come across something like this. Because to them, again, go back to the hospital idea, a nurse, a male nurse, he's the last person in our mind today that we would ever think of as being militant. Because how can you reconcile helping people with fighting people? But there was no contradiction in those days, because they understood to help people means I have to fight those who are trying to kill them. Okay, and so that's kind of an interesting, the riddle, as I call it in the book, of these two military orders. And there were other ones, but these are the primary military orders.
When you start talking about these monks, and then they picked up their swords, meaning their defense, the line of defense gone one layer in advance, that why we wait till they get injured, and then we tend to their injuries. How about we stop them from getting injured in the first place? I
Preemptive.
think that brought this to my mind, that there was an era that I think some pastors were called black robe regiments in America.
Yeah.
The very pastors that they were preaching Sundays that, hey, this is the situation, and then those people picked up the sword and defending the nation. But in today's, it's like blasphemy, pretty much. If you say I'm a clergy, I'm a Christian, and then even they made what was the name of the movie that this guy was Christian then never wanted to pick up a gun, and it said I only rescue people.
Oh, yeah. Hacksaw Ridge or something.
I mean, it's like that. That's Christianity. If you want to defend, you're just going to. But if you take the gun, that's not Christianity.
So there's an interesting idea here, and it helps explain what's going on. So the problem with modern day man, including modern day Christians, is they're materialists. And what that means is, a regular atheist, secular materialist, it means I just believe in the material. I believe in what I see. None of this spiritual mumbo jumbo. Okay, that's concrete materialism. But I would argue that a lot of Christians kind of adopt that same worldview. They say, of course, we believe in the spirit and we believe in spirituality and afterlife. But by their actions, you will know them, and they act like all that really matters is the material. So now when you take that concept, now pre-Christians, earlier Christians, they actually didn't. They were not materialists. Okay, to them, the spiritual world was maybe even more real than the material world. Yeah. Now I tell you all this to make sense of something, because to the earlier Christians, killing someone was not a big deal. St. Augustine said, people are going to die anyway. Everyone's going to die. You're going to die. I'm going to die. So if someone gets killed, earlier than when he should have, because we're stopping evil, it's not a big deal. But today, because life is short anyway, and then he's going to go to judgment, as you will too. So that was the prevailing understanding. It comes out in the book. But today, even Christians, they cling on so much to the material life, that the idea of my hurting and possibly taking away someone's life, they think is the greatest sin. But it wasn't seen that way, because ending, the finite material life, that's not the end of it from the earlier Christian conception. That's just the beginning. Okay, that's just the husk of flesh. Okay, and if it happens to die now instead of 5 years from now or 10 years, not an issue. Again, St. Augustine is the one that really underscored this. So that's why I think so many Western Christians are so, I can never hurt anyone, because despite themselves, they don't know it, they're materialists. To them, the ultimate, most important thing in life is the physical, which is the life in the now, even though they claim to believe in an afterlife and a spiritual life and so forth. So it comes out in their worldview and actions.
Yes. Wow. You
Want to take a break?
No, it is. It's true, because first of all, your life wasn't as long as today, and you didn't have all these luxuries that you desire if you lived in in the Roman eras or the 2nd, 3rd centuries. I mean, the Christians were dragged and thrown before beasts. So, like, what good about this to desire as in a materialistic worldview? Right. So, better be a spirit, better be a God, better be a spiritual world. And now when you think about it, wow, it is so true that you want to desire this life is that's all it is, and you become materialistic as a Christian. So there's a comment, there's a question for you in the Seth is asking, Raymond, was Muslim kidnapping of Christians slave a motivation, Christian slaves a motivation for the Knights of Templar to fight back? Is Muslim attacking and taking Christians and as slaves and sell them, of course, to slavery or raping them or so many other things? This was a motivation to the Knights to fight back?
Well, that would be under the umbrella motivation. In other words, of course, the main motivation is just protecting Christians, whether it's just from normal attacks, whether it's from death, whether it's from slavery, whether it's from rape. So it's essentially the main motivation is to protect Christians, and from all the above, of course, from slavery. The Knights of St. John, who outlived the Templars and eventually became a naval force later on from Malta and Rhodes. Mm-hmm. A lot of their work would be to attack Ottoman and Mamluk Muslim vessels and basically free the galley slaves who were Christians.
Wow.
And you've seen movies like Spartacus and the galley slaves. That was a big thing in the Mediterranean in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, and they were always Christians who were seized and horrific treatment, living your life basically underneath the hull of a boat. But they really specialized, and they would glory once they would release X amount. And I actually, in the book, I have a picture of that. I think Charles V, where he's releasing a number of slaves from North Africa. I think the number was like 20,000. I don't know if you can see it. You see the bottom picture? He's in the red.
Yes.
They're like naked and they're running, and so he basically freed them. And
so the Muslims would capture these Christians, and then they would use them as pretty much the propeller of their boats and ships. Yeah. No. And then finally, a king decides, now we need to free our people, and goes after them and get 20,000 of them. And
but nobody knows that about him. Mostly he's laughed at now because he's kind of, they talk about anything and everything, including his weird facial structure, and you'll never hear anything noble about him. But that was one noble act that he did, and I never heard it until I read primary sources, and I came across it. And then I found that picture I showed you was actually drawn maybe 2 decades after it happened. So it's rather contemporary. And they were celebrating that an emperor was freeing Christians from Muslims.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I want to little in between the Crusades. We have 1095, the Crusades, or the first Crusades happening, and then we have 632, the death of Muhammad, the self-diagnosed prophet of Islam. Yeah. What was that?
632. You're right.
632. So, what happens between this 632, was it Omar that takes over, and then the movement of Jihad, expansion of Islam, it goes to the next level after the death of Muhammad? And then what happens that the Christians, for example, in Syria, in Iraq, in Lebanon of today, or other places, what happened to them? Why they didn't decide that we should stop and fight now? Now we're 1095 that they decided to fight the first crusade. So why didn't the crusades happen, I don't know, in 650, for example?
Okay, yeah, good question. So first of all, just to give it some background and context, as I briefly alluded, when Muhammad dies in 632, what we call the Middle East and North Africa was primarily Christian, overwhelmingly Christian, more so than Europe. So if you've talked about Christendom in the 7th century, the majority of it was in the Middle East and Africa. That was the more populous, the more advanced, including theologically and as far as being learned. Alexandria was the main school, the main catechist school, for example. So Muhammad dies, and you talk about Omar and so forth, and you have the great Arab conquest, and before long, all that area is conquered and under Islamic rule, including Iran and Egypt. Our countries get conquered right away. Okay. Now, believe it or not, there is resistance. So, for example, I know amongst the Coptic Christians, the natives, they did rise up on numerous occasions. They were just beaten back. The proximity didn't help for either country, for Iran or for Egypt, because we're so close to the Islamic heartland, which at the time, the Umayyads is Damascus. So obviously they could marshal all sorts of power to, quell any sort of insurrections, but they did happen. The fight back, the actual rebuttal, the First Crusade, that was the Europeans. And so basically, to get the perfect context, so Islam conquers Syria, Iran, Egypt, Iraq, the Middle East, and then goes all throughout North Africa, conquering modern-day nations, Libya, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. And then they conquer Spain. Less than 1 century after Muhammad's death, Spain is now Muslim. Wow. Okay, literally 1 century after Muhammad, he dies 632. 732, 1 century, is the Battle of Tours, the one that I mentioned, where Edward Gibbon said that if they won, the Quran would be preached in Oxford. And of course, it's preached in Oxford now under different reasons and circumstances. They didn't have to win through violence, and then this jihad goes on, conquering Christian lands. The Mediterranean islands all get attacked and conquered. Eastern Rome, the Byzantine Empire, is being pressured and attacked, and even The Dark Ages, which is what Europeans or historians would call the Dark Ages in Europe, which was essentially, the 8th, 9th centuries, and it's usually attributed to the Germanic tribes who caused who overthrew Rome. Okay, that used to be but one historian made a very compelling case. His name is Henry Perrin, and he's a 19th century historian. And his theory was actually it was Islam that ushered in the Dark Ages because because of the way they severed Europe. Because remember, Christendom was it was called one Christian lake, the Mediterranean. And you had all of Europe above, and in the south you had North Africa, and the east you had the Middle East. It was one lake.
Yeah.
So once they cut that and they took North Africa and the Middle East, Europe was on its own. And like I told you, that was the weaker brother, the younger brother. Mm-hmm. And so it was cut off from the powerful East at the time. And Islamic assaults continued on it. And that is the beginning of the Dark Ages and in the feudal era. And Christians couldn't live in the coastal areas because that's where all the Islamic slave raids would come. Yes. And they went up in the uphills, and the feudalism begins in that context. And anyway, so finally you fast forward, and this continues going on. The Turks finally come, and they now their jihad goes even further. Now they're conquering Anatolia, which is today Turkey, because they conquered it, and they're finally right in front of Constantinople or the Byzantine region. And at that time in the sources, so we're now in the 1050s, okay? The sources talk about tens of thousands of Christians being slaughtered in Asia Minor. Armenians, Greeks, Georgians, Syriacs, and then this is also the time where the European pilgrims are being attacked and killed, and all of that finally causes the knights of Europe, essentially, which have finally become strong enough to offer a rebuttal. They weren't strong enough in the earlier centuries. This is when they're running away, essentially, from Islam. I mean, you have the Battle of Tours, but they're not taking the offensive. Now they finally take the offensive, go back into the Holy Land. And it's funny because people don't tell you this, but the Armenians and the Syriacs and the Greeks who were living in the East under Islamic rule, when the Crusaders came, they basically fell on their hands and kissed their feet. And because all they saw were these big men with crosses coming to fight their historical oppressor, and going into churches and being believers, and it was just like it was to them like salvation. And no one will ever tell you that. They'll act like no, it was Catholics and Orthodox, they didn't get along, etc. No, the lay people actually completely appreciate it. So that's anyway why it was such a belated response, because the Muslims were completely overwhelming Christendom until finally the knights, the chivalrous order was able to respond. And that's why it's ironic, because the First Crusade, amongst historians, up until recently, was a glorious kind of endeavor. And now it's been so pulled out of context. It's absolutely the most shameful thing.
Yeah.
There's a group of, I'll finish it right here, but there's a group, the First Crusade conquest of Jerusalem is in 1099. In 1999, 1,000 years later, this large group of Germans went on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land from Germany, wearing shirts that said in Arabic, "I'm sorry," for the First Crusade. Anyway,
yep.
You tell me, how does a Muslim register that when they see that?
Oh, they're like, these people are absolutely out of their mind, like totally, absolutely out of their mind. Like then, and one thing, I have two things to say. First of all, the Iranian people, right at this moment, 47 years of oppression of Islam in Iran. The Islamic regime, I'm not talking about the historical Islam, because when the king of Iran, the monarch, prior to the Islamic revolution, the Ayatollahs was in charge, yes, Iranians were Muslims, but they weren't oppressed. There were trades and flights from Tehran to Tel Aviv and other things. I think they called it the South Korea of the Middle East. But lo and behold, the Ayatollah comes in power, Sharia becomes the law of the land, and Iranian people now went from a secular Islam to actually now you have to practice, this is not the house of war anymore, this is the Dar al-Islam, the house of Islam, now you need to practice Islam. And we'll force you to paradise. Why this is important? Because now when the 12 days war between Israel and Iran was happening, I saw this, Raymond, with my eyes. I saw this from Iranians. They said if Israel ever gets on the land to fight, there were more Iranians joining the supposed enemy but they were joining this. They called it the soldier of Moses. The Iranians will join the soldiers of Moses to take and remove their oppressor, Islam. Now it's like where you shared about this Constantinople situation, then the Crusaders were coming in. I felt like that. I'm like, that is so true. If ever America attacks in order to liberate Iran from the hand of the Ayatollahs, Iranians would be tanking God and tanking the American soldiers or the Israeli soldiers that coming in to liberate them. I just felt it. Like I'm like, this is so true. Maybe the clergy and the imam and whoever is in the mosque is not going to agree with it, or maybe some I don't know, some Christians inside Iran, the whatever establishment that is in Iran, they would say no, this is not the right. But the people of Iran, they're going to fall on their knees and they're going to thank these soldiers for rescuing them out of the oppressor, the original oppressor, which Benjamin Netanyahu called it actually the common enemy between the Iranian people and the Jews, or this very enemy, the Ayatollahs of Tehran.
And this actually reminds me of the true nature of the colonial era. I mentioned it to you, and I basically said this is, historians kind of pull it out of context. They don't talk about the long war that I described for 1,000 years of Islam's assault on the Christian world, and they just look at the colonial era. But even that, they don't tell you the fact that a lot of the native people were so happy that Europeans came in and put an end or minimized religious rule, and this includes Muslims. I read, let's say in Egypt, I read a lot of writings, contemporary writings during the time under British rule, and they, people, including Muslims, talk about it as this was the greatest time because we had science and technology and progress and literacy and equality, and you're right. It's people forget it. It's not like a Muslim gene for everyone to want Islam. It's the ones who actually profit and are in power because of Islam.
Greatly benefit from the whole controlling
the leaders.
I think it's the isolation. Islam is the master of providing isolation because the ideology only survives in the vacuum. When debates happen, it's just there's so many holes in it, such as worse than the Swiss cheese, that you just start talking about Islam, it will fall apart. You don't need to bring any other ideologies such as Christianity or Judaism, Buddhism, or anything. Just talk about Islam. Show Islam to Muslims. They realize this is not a divine inspired anything. This is just a man creating its own God and calls it Allah, and then being inspired by Allah to do whatever he wanted to pleases him. That's the bottom line of Islam. But Muhammad realizes this, of course, and then passes down this to his caliphs, that we can't have debates. We can't have anybody make fun of us. We can't have anybody that is debating us, or anybody that disagrees. It's mushrik, is infidel, just get rid of him. Then they create this isolation for Muslims, which creates this really weird controlling situation to keep him in that bondage for the whatever political reason or other reasons that they have. So,
and what you explained is very important because it's 100% true, but it's also applicable to what Western people are suffering from now, which is called the left. Okay, the bottom line is, so let's go to what you just said. Islam cannot brook or tolerate discussion because it's so easily exposed. This is why they have blasphemy laws. Okay, this is the number one reason. Even I translated something a long, long time ago from Ibn Taymiyyah, who basically says that, actually words against Islam are worse than war and violence because they have the power to completely destroy it. So that's why it's so stringent and fanatical about what you say and any criticism. But now if you move to the West and you have this power that they call the left, and I hate that word because it's not accurate, but you notice that even though the left is supposed to be liberal and open-minded, they are like Muslims when it comes to debates. They don't want anyone opening their mouths. They don't want anyone challenging them. They lie. They distort. That's the whole cancel culture, right? The whole no free speech for you. And that also explains why a lot of people wonder, why are Muslims and leftists allied? They're so opposite. The Muslims are draconian, authoritative, conservative. and the leftists are the exact opposite.
Supposedly, they have a theology, they have a God or something, but then liberal, the leftists, they're godless. How did they align so well? How do they mesh and get together so well? I mean, one is atheistic, one is monotheistic, supposedly. This is not going, but then you just go one step, 1 inch below the surface, you're like, my God, this is the exact same practices.
Hmm. And the reason is, once you get past the, the admittedly very different surfaces, right? The one is the left and all it believes, liberalism, and one is conservative patriarchy and toxic masculinity and whatever, right? Islam. You find out really when you get beneath all these things, what's going on is it's a battle between truth and falsehood. Okay, Christianity is the truth, and falsehood has different faces, different anything that's not true is false, and there's a myriad, countless forms of falsehoods. So one is the left, as we call it, and one is Islam. They look different, but in essence, they're the same thing. They're the same driving force against the truth, which is why, even though they look so different, the left looks more like normal people, and Islam even looks closer. In other words, if I put them I would put normal right people here, and Muslims here, and the left here. Mm-hmm. So both of them are closer to like the right, which doesn't make sense, and yet they're together. And the reason is, like I'm telling you, because it has not. These are superficial differences. The real difference is they are fundamental falsehoods at war with truth, and that's why they can be allied with each other, and they can overlook each other's differences for now.
Spiritually speaking, they both have the spirit of Antichrist.
Yeah.
Christ is the truth. Yep. Islam, leftism, whatever it is, this can get together because their author is the Antichrist. They hate the truth of Christianity, and that's where the battle is. Yep. And then they become united at this moment to supposedly fight the truth of the Christianity. I want to. You mentioned about the dark era of supposed Europe or Christendom, and it was because now that lake, the Mediterranean Sea, that used to be the safe haven of Christianity, traveling missionaries going around. Now the routes are it's been cut from every angle. The sea route is cut, the land route is cut, and then of course when you don't have Egypt, you didn't have papyrus or paper to coming up to Europe, so you couldn't write anything or distribute any of that. And then of course the Silk Road is now disconnected, so you can't go. My goodness! So
it was a traumatic event, and nobody talks about
it. Now Europe is isolated to itself, and then you say as a result of jihad, then we have the dark era.
Yeah. So basically, because of the jihad and that whole buildup, that is historically what a lot of historians, not just the one I mentioned, Henry Perrin, but it was at least a major factor or the factor. So for him, it was the factor. But for most historians, it was a major factor. And then they would group them with other attackers. So the Vikings were also assaulting from the north at the same time that the Muslims were assaulting from the south. And you had these Hunnic tribes and Magyars coming from the east. Okay, so it was this constant attack on the Christian world. People don't understand that in this time, Christendom, which was a powerful force in the 6th, 7th century when Islam comes around, and it's the whole Mediterranean, so much of it was chopped down, swallowed up, permanently Islamicized, and then the rest was constantly embattled by all these forces that we're discussing, but especially the Muslim forces. So if Christians if the night culture had not developed as it did precisely then, Christianity would have died. I mean, there's no doubt about it. And earlier historians knew this. And so it's kind of ironic when you get these today, I'm a modern day Christian. I have nothing to suffer. I don't worry about anything. My life is leisurely and easy, but I judge and poo-poo people because you're fighting back. How dare you? I talk about Christians being persecuted in the Middle East, in Nigeria, and then I'll get a Western Christian telling me something like, well, it doesn't matter because, are they saved though? or something to that effect, or, well, Jesus wins in the end. So, and it's kind of like, in the days that we're talking about, in the First Crusade, no one said that. It's not because they didn't believe or have faith. They just thought that they were called to do something to help their fellow brethren, okay? Because they actually were, because that's what Christ says. And that's what actuated them.
Wow, how far have we come? But I want to tell you, brother, there is in the West, especially, I see that when people are seeing the courage in you, it seems that it is in fact getting transferred to them, also impacting them too. And in the beginning, I think 10, 12 years ago, when I started talking about these things, people constantly would say, aren't you worried about safety, your safety? Aren't you worried about speaking out? And this was very confusing to me. Like, this is America, I think. This is the safest for Christians so far. And why everybody is concerned about safety. And I searched to see if Jesus anywhere said, I want you to go be worried about your safety and your protecting your life. But what I found in the Bible, in the words of Jesus, he said, if you protect your life, you're actually losing it. And if you lose it for my sake, you actually find your life. It's
What?
like there's certain verses or certain passages, certain parts of the Gospels or the New Testaments not being preached.
Yeah.
It
That
is,
verse that you just said was always on the lips of these knights.
wow.
They saw their death at war as I'm dying for Christ. Why? Because didn't Jesus say, if you do this to the least of me, you help people, you're doing it for me? Well, that's what they were doing. They were not fighting for plunder, gain, or wealth. They were doing it to protect the least of Christ's brethren and children. Okay,
Yes.
so they saw it, and it's one of the worst things that's happened in the modern era. And I'm telling you, it's by design, it's intentional. It's one of the key ways that the enemies of Christianity have neutralized Christianity is by pulling out of context the peaceful verses and convincing Christians, yeah, here it is. You want to be a good Christian, you never, ever, ever take up arms. When in fact, it was always a part of the Christian tradition. But once you convince Christians that, they've convinced Christians today that you can't even speak up. You can't be confrontational. You can't even say something. You have to just be a doormat, turn the other cheek, as they say. Even though Jesus himself, in the one recorded instance where he was slapped, did not turn the other cheek. He actually questioned his slapper. Okay, so there's obviously symbolic relevance to much of what Jesus says about the passive verses. So anyway, my point is this is all by design. It's all intentional. It's all a way to sabotage Christianity and weaken it from within by having Christians essentially commit suicide and say we will never defend anything because that's the Christian thing to do.
Yeah, that is not the Christian thing to do. That we're defending ourselves. But I think, I think the more your books are coming out, the more people are talking about it. I think there is an awakening. There's a movement. What you see in the West, that people are. I think the Western Christians are fed up with these things. I'm not talking about Episcopalian, God forbid, or Methodist, or those sects. It's just like some of them has been so weakened, and then now you see the trend of homosexuality in the clergy, or I mean, and then they're
It's all
inviting.
interconnected. It's all the same
It's all,
spirit.
I was going to connect it when that happens. You have, for example, this homosexual clergy. Then you have the interfaith dialogues that they bring in Muslims in, and you're just seeing the weirdest coalition is happening. But then you have this remnant of God, the people, the knights of Christ, whatever you want to call them, that are seeing it. This is not what Christianity is.
Yeah.
This is not what
Christianity is
we're called
very,
to as believers. We're called to defend
yeah.
the vulnerable, the weak, to take care of the sick and the widows and the orphans, to defend our nations, our borders. It's just, it has been slow, but I think the pendulum went from one side to another, and now it's coming back. And I'm hoping by the grace of God that before it's too late. I think it's too late now for England to wake up, Germany to wake up. It's I have traveled there. This is I'm a former Muslim. I come from the IRGC background, Iranian Revolutionary Guard background. I've been trained by them, and then there are not very many things that intimidate me as a person, generally speaking, being in that type of environment, and then being in the underground church of Iran among believers that God knows my pastor would get arrested every other week. Like he had a spot in the prison. Like, and then he would come back as two small children, and then he would tell us I was able to share with people there, and then the guards get mad and then threw me out. And we looked at those Christians, we're like, glory to God. I mean, what is in this life that you should be afraid of dying, if that's your example? All to say, brother, is that when I traveled to Germany, when I traveled to England, I was more afraid than when I was in Iran or in Middle East ministering. The version of Islam I see, the Salafi, the Wahhabi, that type of yellow bearded, ugly looking with the mark of the beast on their forehead. You're like, this even is worse than Middle East now. They're scrolling around on a Friday. If you drink or you're not wearing your hijab, they're enforcing the Islamic code. I mean, in Germany, I mean, people don't believe it. I was more intimidated there. And I think to take Europe back now, it is very, very difficult. It is going to take literal nights to.
I'd like you to elaborate a little bit, because you're touching on something that I know, but you can even speak better about it, which is basically, I mean, in the West, oftentimes they try to present Iran as the absolute boogeyman of Islam, which I know it's not, because first of all, it's Shia. And yeah, say what you want, Shias are a little more mystical and moderate than the Sunnis and the Salafis especially. So you're telling me that when you walk in the streets of Iran, it doesn't look as radical as walking in the streets of Birmingham, England, right?
Absolutely, 100%. I have witnessed both of them in my eyes. It's not like I need to read it someplace.
No, I know.
When I was in Birmingham, when I was in London, parts of London, I mean, I could not believe my eyes. Like, what is happening here? I was in Germany. I'm like, this has gone too far. I mean, Iranians are turning away from Islam. They're turning, and the Islam that is in the Europe is worse than the Islam that we've been practicing for the past, 14
But
centuries.
it's worse. Here's the thing. It's worse, I think, because the people bringing Muslims into Europe are bringing the worst ones.
The worst one. That even Muslim countries don't want them.
Yeah. It's kind of like what I hear here in America. And the same thing's happening, which is, the people who come from Mexico is giving us their criminals, the people they don't want. So it's almost like in Europe, the Muslims, it's not, there are good moderate regions better than others. Okay. But they're bringing literally Salafis and Wahhabi types, and jihadists.
Yes.
Those are the ones that are brought into Europe. And this is why it's so hard to imagine that this is all organic, that it's not by design, that this is just happening. No, there's something going on that's very intentional and very destructive and with very ill intent.
There's something very diabolical that is going on, that is empowering, bringing these people, and then there's so many nonprofits or charities that are helping, enabling them, and then you tell them that assimilation is a evil thing in this charity type of situations. What is this one? Lutheran Family Services or something like that. I'm not talking about Lutherans in general. I'm talking about specific an organization that tells this, for example, Afghans or Iraqis, that assimilating into American is a bad thing, is unnecessary. Keep your culture. We want you to go to mosques and practices. You're like, this is not normal. This cannot be grassroots. These people have come up with these ideas on their own. It has to be a very diabolical infiltration of these specific organizations to enable the enemy within, empowering them, and pretty much cut them off from any Western Christian influence.
Yeah. And here's, I always say this, you can think with me, maybe you have a better idea, but, to find out if something's weird or abnormal, what I like, let's say in the West, what I like to do is compare and contrast it with behaviors outside the West. So we already discussed in the West, if you're a European, well, you need to suppress your religion and your heritage and your culture and make room for the newcomers. Can you think of another country or civilization outside the West that would ever do that?
Never. There is none.
And they're the majority. You remember, Europeans or white people are something like 69% of the whole world. Okay, and they're the ones who are told, you have to give up your land, you have to give up your culture, you have to suppress yourself and make room for the minority, because in their eyes they just see America and Europe, and they're still the majority, the Europeans. So they feel it's their job to give in. But in the context of the whole world, you guys are a small dot. You're like an endangered species, and even your own homelands, you are being conditioned to give away, and your own civilization. It's I've never seen anything like this. It's so mind-boggling.
Curious.
That's
Yeah.
why it goes back to it's all by design. There's no way. It's of course it's a long-term project, and it took generations to convince people to kill themselves the way they are. But it's definitely by design.
I, but Raymond, I can sit here, God knows, and I mean, you talk, there is points, ding, 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 ding in my brain. It's turning on. I just need to stop and then ask you, tell us more about the book. Where can we get it? And if people want to get your articles, your writings, where do they need to go? Everything you will say, it is already in the description of this video, and people can go click there. But please tell us more about that.
Sure, and thanks for the opportunity, Mohammed. So my one-stop place for everything is my website, RaymondIbrahim.com, RaymondIbrahim. All my articles are there. I'm still working on the website. It's being renovated, but they go back. That website was created in 2004, I think. So I've got over 20 years of articles. Last time I checked, it was over 2,000 articles that I had written in the last 2+ decades. But also there's links to my books. You can also get signed copies if you want to help support my work, and I'll sign a copy and personalize it for you. And then there's links to my YouTube and whatnot. And and this is the new book, The Two Swords of Christ, which talks a lot about the themes we discussed and how Christians were able to surmount this idea that you're a doormat. And they actually learned, no, that true love can manifest itself through militancy, okay, because we're not limited to this material world, and it's all about stopping evil in the now and protecting the innocent and the poor. So that book, I think, is going to be I'm hoping it continues to open eyes like its predecessors, the Sword and Scimitar.
Yes, the Sword and Scimitar, or the Defenders of West. Excellent works. Thank you so much for what you do. Please come back.
I will. I enjoyed this.
Yeah, I think we can talk a whole lot then about Islam itself, the origins of Islam and the laws of Islam, what Muslims believe in the books. I'm not talking about individual Muslims as a general, and I think it would be good discussions. And then maybe we do one on the Defender of the West, the Defenders of the West, and also the Sword and Scimitar. So you're always welcome back, Brother Raymond. Thank you so much for your time. I know you blessed a lot of people. Any final thoughts?
No, thank you very much, Mohammed. I'd be very happy to join you. Usually after my first interview, I decide if I'll ever do another interview with that person again or not. And by all means, you pass with flying colors. So anytime you want, just contact me. And I think we'll have a good chemistry and we can cover a lot of territory.
Awesome. Folks, you heard it. Make sure you go to RaymondIbrahim.com and you can subscribe to his YouTube channel, and make sure all of his X account, I believe Instagram account, YouTube, all of it is in the description. And make sure you support my brother. And then, folks, thank you so much. Share this everywhere because people need to hear these things, especially Christians in your church. Your pastors need to hear this.